We're here in the basement of the Leader Post in an area that we call our morgue, and it's filled with newspapers that go back decades to when this paper began in the late 1800s. And it's one of my favorite places at the Leader Post, where I've spent a lot of time doing research. I love looking into old crimes and the crimes that shape this province and its people. We're going to launch a new series, and that's why we're here, a new web series that will look at past crimes that shaped this province. "35 years ago this month, on January 21st, 1983, there was a crime that rocked this city and this province. It was the murder of JoAnn Wilson. JoAnn had been married to Colin Thatcher, and Colin, very well-known personality in this province. He was the son of a premier. He was a cabinet minister at the time. JoAnn is found murdered in the garage of her home. She was bludgeoned quite bitterly and then finally died when she was shot in the head. These weren't sort of the usual suspects, if I can put it that way. These were people of power and wealth, and for JoAnn to suddenly end up dead was surprising, but in another way not so surprising. Almost 18 months, 2 years earlier, she had been shot in the arm, in the shoulder, and it wasn't seen as random. She was in the middle at that point of what had become a very acrimonious divorce and child custody battle. I mean, all resources were put towards investigating this crime. Colin Thatcher was certainly high on that list of suspects, and what ultimately turned the case was an informant who had agreed to wear a wire. Now, this fellow's name was Gary Anderson. Gary Anderson said he had been hired as a hitman to kill JoAnn Wilson. He never, though, carried out the crime, but he said he had been hired by Colin Thatcher. But what Gary Anderson said was on that tape was a discussion with Colin Thatcher, and Colin Thatcher essentially admitting that he had killed JoAnn Wilson. And one of the most famous lines is Colin Thatcher saying, "Deny, deny, deny." What he was telling Gary Anderson was, if the police come to you and question you, just deny, deny, deny. And so he was arrested by police and taken back to Regina and charged with first-degree murder. That happened in May 1984. And Colin Thatcher did take the stand at that trial and very vigorously denied that he had killed or hired anyone to kill his wife. In the end, the jury was told that regardless of whether Colin had actually done the deed or whether they found that he had hired someone to do it, that regardless he could be convicted of first-degree murder, and so he was. That never really ended the story, though. Colin Thatcher very vigorously and for years fought that conviction and his sentence, which was of course a mandatory life sentence for first-degree murder. There were appeals to the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal. There was then, after all those sort of appeals in the courts were exhausted, he then tried to use sort of applications through the government to try to overturn what he called a miscarriage of justice. They all failed. At that time, the law allowed anyone convicted of first-degree murder to apply for something called a faint hope hearing. And so in the 90s, having served at least 15 years for his crime, Colin Thatcher was allowed to come before a jury, and did that in Moose Jaw, where he applied for a shot at early parole. He was denied that chance at early parole, but the jury did allow him the opportunity to try again, and he did a few years later. And he was ultimately granted that chance for early parole. And so in 2006, he was finally granted full parole. I was at that parole hearing, and I remember something to the effect of Colin Thatcher telling the parole board that he just wanted to sort of go quietly back to his ranch. He never wanted to be in the media spotlight again, and he just wanted to sort of be with his cattle. But he never, as well, completely escaped that spotlight, because he also published his own book. And that book was really a plea for why he believed he was innocent and people should have found him innocent. Interestingly enough, it prompted new law in this province around criminals profiting from their crimes through books. All that money, what little money Colin had made from his book, which actually sold quite well, all of that money went back to the government, and they donated it to women's groups. So at the end of the day, something sort of went back to help people like JoAnn Wilson, who were women who lived in troubled and abusive marriages and paid for it with their lives.